Jesus Christus, praised be Jesus Christ, and a most warm welcome to all of you who are joining us as we see our Holy Father right here greeting the President of France, Emmanuel Macron. We are in Marseille in southern France, where Pope Francis is on his 44th apostolic journey. Pope Francis has come primarily to take part in an event that we are about to witness, the concluding session of the Mediterranean meetings, also called Med 23, a church-led initiative aiming to build community among the region's various peoples, religions, and cultures, and we'll be hearing a bit more of that shortly. Before continuing, from wherever you're joining us, I'd like to welcome all of you as we now see Pope Francis arm in arm with the President of France. Beautiful image here. Some of you we know tuning in through various Vatican Media channels, through the Vatican Media app, the Vatican Radio app, our Vatican News English web portal, YouTube channel, or Facebook live feed. Our Holy Father now receiving flowers from children, speaking with them through an interpreter here. Now receiving a gift from another child. And we have some of you tuning in through television, through those of you joining in through Salt and Light Media, EWTN at Madarshan TV, Shalom World Television, Catholic Faith Network, Catholic TV, and Uganda Catholic Television. And now a girl stepping forward. She's given the Holy Father a book. There is writing in it. We see the Holy Father leafing through it, perhaps messages from friends. We know some of you are also tuning in through radio, perhaps through our shortwave radio broadcast or through other local or diocesan radio channels. And to those of you joining through other digital platforms, a most warm welcome to you all as our Holy Father continues to greet several children on hand for the occasion in the company of the President of France, Emmanuel Macron. My name is Sister Bernadette. It's a pleasure to be able to provide the English language translations and texts for you today. Pope Francis departed yesterday from Rome's Fiumicino Airport at around 2:30 p.m. Rome time yesterday. That's Friday. Arriving at about 4 o'clock p.m. in Marseille. There's no time difference, so he's in the same time zone. He was welcomed by France's Prime Minister and then headed to the Basilica of Notre-Dame de la Garde, Marseille's Basilica, where he prayed with priests, Marian prayer to Our Lady de la Garde, and then with religious leaders these religious leaders dedicated to the pastoral care of seafarers, migrants, and refugees near a memorial built. And our Holy Father now getting into his wheelchair for this next part. Today is Pope Francis' first public event. It's his second day here in France. Earlier this morning, he met with people who are living in difficult situations at a home operated by the Missionaries of Charity. He met with them in private. Then he traveled here, where the meeting will be taking place in the Palais du Pharo, a palace in Marseille, France, built in 1858 by Emperor Napoleon III for Empress Eugenie. Our Holy Father now entering the facility. We see an olive tree here. Now, Pope Francis on Sunday asked everyone to pray for this event. He's calling the Mediterranean Encounters, which he will be participating in the concluding event here. He called it a fine initiative. Here we see the olive tree completely, and it has notes on it overseeing the other parts of the city here on the banks here. This is an event that includes a lot of different countries whose borders lie along the Mediterranean. It brings together ecclesial and civil leaders to promote paths of peace, collaboration, and integration around the Mare Nostrum, which is Latin for our sea. And our Holy Father reminded us that the special intention of this meeting is to focus on the phenomenon of migration. He called this a challenge. It's not an easy challenge. As we see from the news, which we all must face, of migrants who continue to cross this territory. He said it's essential for the future that we face this phenomenon together, which we must face in fraternity, he said. Now we see other members here joining, the ecclesial leaders who have been joining here. This is, Francis is the first pope to visit Marseille since 1533, when Pope Clement VII visited Marseille. He was a member of the de Medici family, and as Pope Clement VII, he arrived here in the city for the wedding of King Francis I's son, who was the future King Henry II, who married the Pope's niece, Catherine de' Medici. And this is the second French city who has hosted Pope Francis. Pope Francis visited Strasbourg in 2014 in November, when he visited the European Parliament and the Council of Europe. Now, joining in this meeting together are bishops of France and the other Mediterranean dioceses. There are young people here, political authorities, and people representing associations. And as I said, it's called the Mediterranean Meetings. I'm not going to attempt the French. And the meeting began on the 17th of September and will conclude tomorrow on the 24th. The objective is to work on the challenges facing the Mediterranean, the situation of migrants, access to water, poverty, religious plurality, and living together, and to see how to leverage all the resources it has to respond to these challenges so that the region can become sustainable and a, quote, sea of fraternity. So people participating here come from North Africa, the Balkans, the parts of Europe that line the Mediterranean, the Black Sea, and the Middle East. It follows two other meetings which took place, one in 2020 in Bari called Mediterranean Frontier of Peace, in which Pope Francis did take part, and then one held in Florence in 2022, both on the initiative of the Italian Bishops' Conference, at that time led by Cardinal Gualtiero Bassetti. Our Holy Father did intend to participate in that conference, but in the end had to decline due to problems with his knee. So the bishops from these regions, we're seeing some of them here from the various Mediterranean regions or dioceses, gathered here, showing their commitment to carrying forth the process that was begun in Italy. There's been all kinds of concerts, exhibitions, prayer vigils taking place during the week in Marseille. There's about 150 partners who've come together to make this meeting possible, advocating the values of solidarity, intercultural and interreligious dialogue, various cultures, integration through economic activity, the preservation of ecological balances, so important, especially in the Mediterranean area. And they also include conferences, theatrical type shows, various walks that were planned through the city. A football tournament, a soccer tournament was arranged. There was a solidarity banquet with 600 people in vulnerable situations, some enhancing the folk dances of the Mediterranean area, testimonies from migrants and associations who help and support them, spaces for dialogue on taking care of the Mediterranean region. There were about 70 exhibitors held on the Esplanade. And we have various bishops taking place. We've been seeing them. Looks like our Holy Father is now entering the stage. We see the Archbishop of Baghdad is here. Of course, the Archbishop of Marseille, the Cardinal Jean-Marc Aveline, will be hearing from him, as well as Gualtiero Bassetti, who would have hosted the meetings in Italy. Our Holy Father being welcomed here onto the stage, arriving in his wheelchair. And he'll now be helped to the chair here that has been positioned here, and on either side of him the bishops representing these Mediterranean dioceses. And we hear a greeting from the audience, from those partaking in these meetings from Africa. We'll hear first from the Cardinal Archbishop of Marseille, Jean-Marc Aveline. Then we'll have a video presentation followed by an address by a bishop and a young person. We see also in attendance the President of France, Emmanuel Macron. Everyone has now taken their seats here.
Très Saint-Père,
Most Holy Father, Mr. President of the Republic,
Mesdames, Messieurs, chers amis,
ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, it gives me great pleasure to welcome you this morning to the beautiful amphitheater of the Palais du Pharo for the closing session of the Rencontres Méditerranéennes de Marseille. Thank you, Mr. President of the Republic, for honoring us with your presence in this city that you love, on this day when receiving the Holy Father and also representatives from all over France and from all the countries of the Mediterranean, it finds itself precisely in a deep vocation, a call, that of being a bridge linking North and South, Europe and the Mediterranean, a gateway to the East and a gateway to the West, or as you have said, Most Holy Father, during the Angelus last Sunday, a gateway to hope. I would particularly like to thank the Mayor of Marseille for his welcome to this prestigious site and for the very important role the city of Marseille has played in organizing this pontifical visit. Around you, Most Holy Father, are bishops who have come to take part in these meetings from the 5 shores of the Mediterranean, North Africa, the Middle East, the Black Sea, the Balkans, and Latin Europe. Also, in the assembly are students and young professionals from the same countries who have been invited to come and work for a week in Marseille to help the bishops. We've moved by your deep sense of compassion of the countries currently facing the most trying tragedies.
Des évêques venus participer à ces rencontres en provenance des 5 rives de la Méditerranée, l'Afrique du Nord, le Proche-Orient, la mer Noire, les Balkans, l'Europe latine. Nos échanges depuis mercredi
Our exchanges since Wednesday evening have enabled us to continue to get to know each other following our meetings in Bari and Florence, and to address together the major challenges of our pastoral mission in the service of the peoples of the Mediterranean. We are all delighted that you were able to join us in prayer and reflection, to encourage us and point the way forward. The Mediterranean faces so many challenges. Also in the assembly are young people, students and young professionals from the same countries, from all denominations and religions, who've been invited to come and work for a week to help the bishops refine their analysis of the situation and consider what concrete initiatives should be taken. In these 2 days, they've been very fruitful, and Holy Father, we are touched by your concern for the peoples they represent in the diversity of their cultures and religions. And we are moved this morning by a deep sense of compassion for the countries currently facing the most trying tragedies, whether due to war or natural disaster: Morocco, Tunisia, Libya, Iraq, Syria, Turkey, Ukraine, and Armenia, to name but a few.
Il n'y a pas beaucoup d'endroits en Méditerranée où la vie est tranquille. Sont également présents dans notre assemblée non seulement Monsieur le Président de la République française,
also present in our assembly are not only the President of the French Republic and some of his ministers, but also local and national politicians, whom I gratefully welcome, in particular the presidents of the region, the department, and the metropolis, who have contributed greatly to the preparation of this great event. Thank you very much. I would also like to draw your attention to the presence in our assembly of members of the diplomatic corps, of whom there are many in Marseille, as well as civil society players committed to serving the people of the Mediterranean, particularly on the issues of malnutrition, education, access to water, and many other areas. I'd like to extend my special welcome to the sponsors who have helped us create not a Marseille en Grande, Mr. President, but for these exceptional days, Marseille en Très Grande. And not a grand Marseille, but an even greater Marseille, in other words, on a global scale. Since Monday, a major cultural, associative, spiritual, ecumenical, interreligious festival has brought together a large number of people for concerts, conferences, plays, and a village set up on the cathedral esplanade. Last night, a major solidarity banquet was held, welcoming almost 600 people in precarious circumstances for a meal offered by several of the city's restaurants and served by volunteers from numerous associations, both believers and unbelievers.
Enfin, il y a dans l'Assemblée la grande majorité des évêques de France. Et je tiens à les saluer.
Last but not least, the vast majority of France's bishops are in attendance.
Que ce déplacement à Marseille, axé sur la Méditerranée, ne constituait pas.
But as I said to you recently, France, through its bishops and many pilgrims, is happy to come and pray with you, listen to you, and learn to look at the Mediterranean with you.
La France, à travers ses évêques et bon nombre de pèlerins, c'est elle qui est venue prier avec vous. C'est elle qui voulait vous écouter et surtout apprendre à regarder avec vous la Méditerranée, apprendre à se décentrer d'elle-même en prenant conscience des drames.
We are happy to listen to you and learn to look at the Mediterranean with you, becoming aware of the tragedies that occur there, and reflect on our country's responsibility towards this part of the world that is part of its history and geography.
Envers la France, à travers Marseille, en nous aidant à regarder avec vous la Méditerranée, très Saint-Père, soyez profondément remerciés. Cher Pape François, nous allons maintenant regarder avec vous une petite vidéo qui retrace quelques moments forts de cette
Most
semaine.
Holy Father, dear Pope Francis will now watch a video with you recounting some of the highlights of this week. Then we'll listen to a bishop and a young man share with you the conclusions of our work, and above all, we'll listen to you once again. Thank you very much for being with us.
Que nous avons commencé au service des sociétés et des peuples dans lesquels l'Église est haute sur tous les pays de la Méditerranée.
Bishop has been going off
Par la
script.
création, si vous en étiez d'accord, d'une conférence ecclésiale de la Méditerranée. Il faut que nous trouvions des moyens. Il faut que nous trouvions des moyens. Au nom de tous, très Saint-Père, merci infiniment pour
In
votre présence parmi
the name
nous.
of everyone,
Un immense
many thanks
encouragement à tous les artisans
for being
de
with
paix
us and encouraging
dont beaucoup
us.
sont ici avec nous ce matin. Grazie, Santo Padre.
And he concluded with the words in Italian, "Thank you, Your Holiness." The Cardinal Archbishop of Marseille here, Jean-Marc Aveline, greeting our Holy Father after these words of greeting. And now we too will watch the film that has been prepared.
Preghiamo il Signore affinché muova i
Let us
cuori
pray
e tutti
to
possano
the Lord that
superare
everyone
la
might be
velocità
moved
dello
to
scontro,
overcome the logic of conflict, of hate, and of revenge, in order to find ourselves brothers, children of one sole Father, who makes his sun rise on the good and the bad. And we're seeing images of people arriving and some of the events that have taken place.
Invochiamo lo Spirito
We
Santo,
invoke the Holy Spirit. We call on the Holy Spirit that each one of us, through daily gestures, might contribute to build new relationships inspired by understanding, welcome, patience, placing ourselves in conditions to be able to experience the joy of the gospel and to spread it in every place of our life.
Vergine Maria,
May the Virgin Mary, the Star of the Sea, to whom we turn as the greatest example of faithfulness to Jesus and his word, help us to walk on this path.
Merci aux équipes de Med23 pour la réalisation de ce film, en particulier Astrid Desjobert.
Thank you to the team for having created this film.
Nous accueillons maintenant Maria Serena Bonazzi del Pochetto, qui est italienne et vient nous parler de ce
will
qui
now
s'est vécu
hear a
cette
testimony
semaine
from Maria
lors de ces
Serena,
rencontres entre les jeunes et les évêques du bassin méditerranéen.
and then we'll be hearing from a bishop from one of the Mediterranean dioceses. First, Maria Serena, who's from Italy.
Buongiorno Santo Padre, buongiorno a tutti.
Good day, Holy Father. Good day to everyone. My name is Maria Serena. I am Italian, but for 2 years I've been living in Greece with the John the 23rd community, first in Lesbos and now in Athens. In Athens, I live in a group home, a family that has decided to welcome under their own roof and to share life with those who are most in need. Specifically now, we live with migrants. We're not professionals. We're not doctors, psychologists, or anything else. So what we're trying to do is simply to offer others who we are, with all of our limitations. But perhaps that is the key, to treat each other truly as brothers and sisters. By being with those who are poor, we realize that we too are poor. We all possess poverty, and we all need others. We need to share what we are without a lot of talk or without having degrees or special skills, simply welcoming each other. As you've said, Your Holiness, in your visit to the island of Lesbos, to reject the poor means rejecting peace. Whoever rejects the poor, whoever rejects a brother or a sister, rejects peace. And I would say closes doors and also rejects the Spirit. A beautiful thing I've experienced during these days, something that I carry with me that I've put into words, is this: let the Spirit flow. When we reject others, when we close doors, when we build walls and barriers, we close doors not only to our brothers and sisters, but also to the Spirit, to God's Spirit, or to God. And in these days, I've really seen that the Spirit is at work in each person. Although all of us, young people and bishops who are here, come from very different backgrounds, I've received witnesses from people who really have hope and allow the Spirit to work in them, everyone in a very specific and wonderful way. In these days, I think I've experienced a miracle. In such few days, in addition to working and developing proposals, we've developed fraternity, a fraternity that touches the 5 shores of the Mediterranean. A Mediterranean that really needs to live fraternity and to spread it everywhere, because, and I'd like to emphasize this, the Mediterranean now can no longer be a cemetery, but it's a real crime scene against humanity, and we have to shout this out strongly, to shout it out without losing hope. Because, as I said, there are so many signs of hope, and this assembly of young people and bishops together is an example of this hope. So we shouldn't be afraid. Let's let the Spirit flow. Let's spread hope and help each other to do this. For only if we have hope will we be moved to meet, to dialogue, and engage in concrete action. Thank you. We've been hearing Maria Serena. Now she is going to greet our Holy Father. Thank you, Maria Serena. And now we're welcoming Bishop Arhan Dojas, who is the Bishop of Tiran Dores in Albania. Your Holiness, from the deepest abyss of the Mediterranean in the time of the communist dictatorship, when I was still a young boy, I went to the Bishop of Tirana Dorazzo, and I experienced personally the coming to light, or the rise of the light of hope. I was born in 1977 in Albania. 10 years before I was born, my country, through its constitution, declared itself atheist, and the churches had been destroyed. Yes, God had been erased in every visible sign. For that reason, I grew up without any religious reference. I saw only my grandmother praying the rosary in front of a barn. Oh, where I first discovered there used to be a church. Even grandfather always prayed in secret. My childhood was characterized by so much poverty, misery, and ideology. Along with this, our families were afraid of being arrested and taken to concentration camps or labor camps or prisons of the regime. My uncle, my mother's brother, was arrested. While all of Albania was like an open air concentration camp, we Catholics, Muslims and Orthodox, we lived the synodality of suffering and support, which today has brought the fruit of fraternity and harmony. It's a small child of our people. It's a child of the great saint of our world, Mother Teresa, who brought the love of God and His gospel. After the fall of communism, even I, like many others, crossed the sea and migrated to Italy, where I lived for years. In my experience as a migrant, God overwhelmed me with His generosity through providential encounters and made me rediscover faith through baptism and through a journey of faith lived with a group called the Immaculata. I discovered a vocation to the priesthood. I'm grateful to the Lord and to Our Lady for their presence and their support in all the circumstances of my life, which always and even now as bishop continue to bestow. Mary is always a Stella Maris, the star of the sea. So even today in the Mediterranean, even in difficult storms, even when the sea is calm, she is always the Queen of Peace. May there be peace always. And today there are still so many people living difficult situations. There are also great distances, those faced by our migrant brothers and sisters, those that mark the experience of our people from the social and economic point of view. Migrants bring with them not only many trials, sufferings, and violence they've endured, but above all, they are bearers of a great hope, the hope they hold in their hearts, which gives them the courage to face so many sacrifices and barriers. There are also positive distances related to the richness of the cultural and spiritual diversity of our peoples. In these days in Marseille, as churches and believers of the Mediterranean region, we've experienced this. Here, we've experienced that diversity as a richness produces wealth. It shortens negative distances and nurtures fraternity. Of these days, I retain the certainty that a positive, joyful, and hopeful way of looking at reality makes us credible witnesses of God's style. Fraternal closeness, human compassion, and prophetic tenderness. The experience of the Mediterranean meetings is prophetic because by allowing a meeting between bishops and young people, this gives rise to the hope that the old shall have dreams and the young visions. The freshness of young people's insights allows the bishops to express their dreams. And the words of the bishops have given more concreteness to the visions of the young people. And in that sense, we think it would be appropriate to continue the Mediterranean meetings, opening ourselves more and more to others and to diversity, pursuing that synodal perspective that you, Holy Father, have pointed out to us as the ecclesial style of our time, what God expects of the third millennium. Dear Holy Father, Our Lady de la Garde, may she protect and guide our church always. Thank you. current bishop in Albania, who himself has lived as a migrant, sharing his story with us, now participating in this Mediterranean meetings here in Marseille, having lived personally what it's like to be a migrant in this area. We now prepare ourselves for the Pope's discourse. Mr. President of the Republic, dear brother bishops, distinguished mayors and authorities, representing cities and territories bordered on the Mediterranean Sea. Dear friends, I offer my cordial greetings, and I'm grateful to each of you for having accepted the invitation of Cardinal Aveline to participate in these meetings. Thank you for your work and the valuable reflections that you've shared. After Bari and Florence, the journey in service to the Mediterranean peoples is moving forward. Here too, church and civil leaders are gathered, not to deal with mutual interests, but animated by the desire to take care for men and women. Thank you for involving young people who are the present and future of the church and society. Marseille is a very ancient city founded by Greek sailors who came from Asia Minor. Legend traces it back to a love story between an immigrant sailor and a native princess. From its beginnings, it has displayed a diverse and cosmopolitan character. It welcomes the riches of the sea and gives a homeland to those who no longer have one. Marseille tells us that, despite difficulties, coexistence is possible and is a source of joy. On the map, it almost seems to draw a smile between Nice and Montpellier. And I like to think of it that way, that Marseille is the smile of the Mediterranean.
So
I'd like to offer you some thoughts centered around three aspects that characterize Marseille: the sea, the port, and the lighthouse. These are three symbols. The sea, a tide of peoples, has made this city a mosaic of hope, with its great multi-ethnic and multicultural tradition, represented by the more than 60 consulates in its territory. Marseille is both a diverse and distinct city, for it is its diversity, the fruit of an encounter with the world, that makes its history distinct. Nowadays, we often hear that Mediterranean history is an intertwining of conflicts between different civilizations, religions, and visions. Let's not ignore the problems. And yet, let us not be misled. The exchanges that have taken place between peoples have made the Mediterranean the cradle of salvation, of civilization. A sea overflowing with treasures, to the point that, as a great French historian wrote, it is, quote, not one landscape, but countless landscapes, not one sea, but a succession of seas. For millennia, everything has flowed into it, complicating and enriching its history. Unquote. Our sea is a place of encounter among the Abrahamic religions, among Greek, Latin, and Arabic thought, among science, philosophy, and law, and among many other realities. It has conveyed to the world the lofty value of the human being, endowed with freedom, open to truth, and in need of salvation, who sees the world as a wonder to be discovered and as a garden to be inhabited, under the imprint of a God who makes covenants with men and women. A great mayor saw in the Mediterranean not a question of conflict, but a response of peace. Indeed, quote, the beginning and foundation of peace among all the nations of the world, unquote. This, he said, in fact, is, quote, the answer. It's possible if we consider the common and, so to speak, permanent vocation that Providence assigned in the past, assigns in the present, and, in a certain sense, will assign in the future to the peoples and nations who live on the shores of this mysterious, enlarged lake of Tiberias, that is the Mediterranean, unquote.
Lago di Tiberiade, ovvero mare di Galilea, un luogo cioè nel quale ai tempi di Cristo.
At the time of Christ, the Lake of Tiberias, or the Sea of Galilee, had a concentration of various populations, beliefs, and traditions. It was precisely there in the Galilee of the Gentiles, crossed by the sea route, that the greater part of Jesus' public life took place. A multifaceted and in many ways unstable context was the place for the universal proclamation of the Beatitudes, in the name of a God who is Father of all, who makes his sun rise on the evil and on the good, and sends rain on the just and on the unjust. This was also an invitation to broaden the frontiers of the heart, overcoming ethnic and cultural barriers. Here, then, is the answer that comes from the Mediterranean. This perennial Sea of Galilee urges us to oppose the divisiveness of conflicts with the, quote, coexistence of differences, unquote. Our sea, Mare Nostrum, at the crossroads of north and south, east and west, brings together the challenges of the whole world as the five shores on which you have reflected bear witness: North Africa, the Near East, the Black and Aegean Seas, the Balkans, and Latin Europe. It is an outpost of challenges that concern everyone. Let's think of the climate, with the Mediterranean representing a hot spot where changes are felt more quickly. How important it is to safeguard the Mediterranean patchwork, a unique treasure trove of biodiversity. In short, this sea, an environment that offers a unique approach to complexity, is a mirror of the world and bears within itself a global vocation to fraternity. This is the only way to prevent and overcome conflict. Brothers and sisters, amidst today's sea of conflicts, we are here to enhance the contribution of the Mediterranean so that it can return to being a laboratory of peace, for this is its vocation, to be a place where different countries and realities encounter each other on the basis of the humanity we all share, and not on the basis of contrasting ideologies. Indeed, the Mediterranean expresses a way of thinking that is not uniform and ideological, but multifaceted and consistent with the way things are, a vital, open, and accommodating way of thinking. That's the word. One that's communitarian. How greatly we need this at the present juncture, when antiquated and belligerent nationalisms want to make the dream of the community of nations fade. Yet, let us remember this: with weapons we make war, not peace. And with greed for power, we always return to the past. We don't build the future. Where should we begin then in order for peace to take root? On the banks of the Sea of Galilee, Jesus began by giving hope to the poor and proclaimed them blessed. He listened to their needs, healed their wounds, and above all, announced to them the good news of the kingdom. We need to start again from there, from the often silent cry of the least among us, not from the fortunate ones, the first class, who have no need of help yet still raise their voices. Let us, the Church and civil society, start anew by listening to the poor, who should be embraced, not counted, for they are faces, not numbers. The change of direction in our communities lies in treating them as brothers and sisters whose story we know, not as troublesome problems that we want to send back home. It lies in welcoming them, not hiding them, integrating them, not evicting them, and giving them dignity. And I'd like to repeat that Marseille is the capital of the integration of people. This should be your pride. Today, the sea of human coexistence is polluted by instability, which even assails beautiful Marseille. Where there is instability, there is crime. When there is a lack of work, together with material, educational, cultural, and religious poverty, the path is open for gangs and illicit trafficking. The commitment of institutions alone is not enough. We need a jolt of conscience to say no to lawlessness, and yes to solidarity, which is not a drop in the ocean, but is the indispensable element for purifying the waters. Indeed, the real social evil is not so much the increase of problems, but the decrease of care. Who nowadays becomes a neighbor to young people left to themselves, who are so easy prey for crime and prostitution? Who takes care of them? Who is close to people enslaved by work that should make them freer? Who cares for the frightened families, afraid of the future and of bringing children into the world? Who's listening to the groaning of our isolated elderly brothers and sisters, who instead of being appreciated are pushed aside under the false pretenses of a supposedly dignified and sweet death that is actually more salty than the waters of the sea? Who's thinking of the unborn children rejected in the name of a false right to progress, which is instead a retreat into the selfish needs of the individual? Today we have the tragedy of confusing babies with puppies. And one secretary said that going through St. Peter's Square, they've seen a woman who had a baby in a baby carriage, but it wasn't a baby in the end, it was a puppy. And this tells us something. Who's looking with compassion beyond their own shores to hear the cry of pain rising from North Africa and from the Middle East? How many people live immersed in violence and endure situations of injustice and persecution? And here I'm thinking of the many Christians who are frequently forced to leave their homelands or dwell in them without having their rights recognized, not enjoying full citizenship. Please, brothers and sisters, let's commit ourselves so that all who are part of society will be citizens with full rights. Lastly, there is a cry of pain that resonates most of all, and it's turning the Mediterranean, our sea, from the cradle of civilization into the mare mortuum, the graveyard of dignity. It's the stifled cry of our migrant brothers and sisters. I want to devote attention to this cry by reflecting on the second image Marseille offers us, that of its port. First the sea, and the second is its port. The port of Marseille has been a wide-open gateway to the sea, to France and to Europe for centuries. From here, many have left to find work and a future abroad, and from here, many have passed through the gateway to the continent with luggage laden with hope. Marseille has a large port and is a grand gateway, which cannot be closed. Several Mediterranean ports, on the other hand, have closed, and there are two words that have resounded, fueling people's fears, invasion and emergency, and this is what has closed the ports. Yet those who risk their lives at sea do not invade. They're looking for welcome. They're looking for life. Regarding the emergency, the migratory phenomenon is not so much a short-term urgency, always there to fuel alarmist propaganda, but it's a reality of our times. It's a process that involves 3 continents around the Mediterranean, and that must be governed with wise foresight, including a European response capable of coping with the objective difficulties. I'm looking at this map, the privileged ports, Cyprus, Greece, Italy, and Spain. These are the ports that are open to the Mediterranean and receive immigrants. The RC, Mare Nostrum, cries out for justice with its shores that on the one hand exude affluence, consumerism, and waste, while on the other there is poverty and instability. Here also the Mediterranean mirrors the world, with the south turning to the north, with many developing countries plagued by instability, regimes, wars, and desertification, looking to those that are well off, a globalized world in which we're all connected, but one in which the disparities have never been so wide. Yet this situation is not a novelty of recent years, and it's not this Pope, who came from the other side of the world, to be the first to warn of it with urgency and concern. Rather, the Church has been speaking about it in heartfelt tones for more than 50 years. It was shortly after the conclusion of the Second Vatican Council that St. Paul VI, in his encyclical Populorum Progressio, wrote, quote, "The hungry nations of the world cry out to the peoples blessed with abundance, and the Church, cut to the quick by this anguished cry, asks each and every person to hear his brother's plea and answer it lovingly." Unquote. Pope Paul listed 3 duties of the more developed nations, quote, stemming from the human and supernatural brotherhood of man: mutual solidarity, that is, the aid that the richer nations must give to developing nations; its duty to social justice, the rectification of trade relations between strong and weak nations; and the third, the duty of universal charity, that is, the effort to build a more human world community for everyone, a world in which everyone could give and receive, where the progress of some isn't bought at the expense of others, unquote. In the light of the gospel and these considerations, Paul VI in 1967 stressed the quote, duty of giving foreigners a hospitable reception, unquote, a duty on which he wrote, quote, "We cannot insist too much," unquote. 15 years earlier, Pope Pius XII had encouraged this, writing that, quote, "The Holy Family in exile, Jesus, Mary, and Joseph emigrating to Egypt, is the model, the example, and support for all migrants and pilgrims of every time and country, of every refugee of whatever condition, who, whether compelled by persecution or by want, are forced to leave their native land and beloved parents, and to seek a foreign soil," unquote. Certainly, no one can fail to see the difficulties involved in welcoming, protecting, or accompanied, promoting and integrating unexpected people if we don't reach the end migrants start to orbit the society. They need to be welcomed, protected, promoted, and integrated. This is the style.
È vero che non è facile.
It's true. It's not easy to have this style to welcome and integrate unexpected persons, yet the principal criterion cannot be the preservation of one's own well-being, but rather the safeguarding of human dignity. Those who take refuge in our midst should not be viewed as a heavy burden to be borne. If we consider them instead as brothers and sisters, they will appear above all as gifts. Tomorrow we celebrate the World Day of Migrants and Refugees. May we allow ourselves be moved by the stories of so many of our brothers and sisters in difficulty who have the right both to emigrate and not to emigrate, and not close ourselves in indifference. History is challenging us to make a leap of conscience in order to prevent a shipwreck of civilization, for the future will not lie in being closed, which is a return to the past, a U-turn in the journey of history. In the face of the terrible scourge of the exploitation of human beings, the solution is not to reject, but to ensure, according to the possibilities of each, an ample number of legal and regular entrances. This would be sustainable with an equitable welcome on the part of the European continent in the context of cooperation with the countries of origin, whereas merely crying enough is to close our eyes. To save ourselves today will turn into a tragedy tomorrow, when future generations will thank us if we were able to create the conditions for a necessary integration. Otherwise, they will censure us if we favor only sterile forms of assimilation. Integration, even of migrants, is tiring, but it's far-sighted. We'll either do it together or it won't be done at all. An assimilation that does not take into account differences and remains rigidly fixed in its own paradigms only makes ideas prevail over reality and jeopardizes the future, increasing distances and provoking ghettoization, which in turn sparks hostility and forms intolerance. We need fraternity as much as we need bread. The same word, brother, in its Indo-European etymology, derives from a root associated with nutrition and sustenance. We will support ourselves only by nourishing with hope the most vulnerable, accepting them as brothers and sisters. Do not neglect to show hospitality, Scripture tells us. And in the Old Testament, it's repeated: the widow, the orphan, and the stranger are those in need of charity. To assist the widow, the orphan, and the stranger who's emigrated. In this regard, the port of Marseille is also a door of faith. According to tradition, it was here that Saints Martha, Mary, and Lazarus landed, and then sowed the seed of the gospel in these lands. Faith comes from the sea, as we are reminded by the evocative Marseille tradition of Candlemas and its maritime procession. In the Gospel, Lazarus is Jesus' friend, but also the name of the protagonist of one of his most timely parables, one that opens our eyes to the inequality that corrodes fraternity and speaks to us of the Lord's preference for the poor. As Christians who believe in God made man, in the one inimitable man who on the shores of the Mediterranean called himself the way, the truth, and the life, we cannot accept that the paths of encounter should be closed. Let's not close the path of encounter, please.
Non possiamo accettare che
We
la
cannot
verità del Dio
accept
denaro
that the truth
prevalga
of
sulla dignità
the Lord
dell'uomo,
of Mammon should
che la
prevail
vita
over human
si
dignity,
tramuti
that
in
life
morte.
should
La
turn into
Chiesa,
death.
confessando che
The
Dio
Church
in
proclaims
Gesù
that
Cristo
God in
si
Jesus
è unito
Christ,
in certo modo
in a
a
certain
ogni
way,
uomo crede,
united himself to
possa
every
Giovanni
man and
Paolo
woman,
II, che la
and
sua vita
believes
è
with John
l'uomo.
Paul II that humanity is her
Adora
way.
Dio e serve i più fragili,
Worship God
Adora
and
Dio
serve
e
the
serve
most
i più
vulnerable,
che sono i suoi
who are
tesori.
his treasures.
Adorare Dio
To adore
e
God
servire
and to
il
serve our
prossimo,
neighbor,
ecco cosa conta.
that is what
Non
counts.
la rilevanza sociale
Not social
o la
importance or
consistenza numerica, ma la
or vast
fedeltà al
numbers, but
Signore
fidelity to the Lord
e all'uomo.
and to humanity.
Questa testimonianza
This
cristiana
is Christian witness.
adesso manca poco, scusatemi. Dare un
Um,
po' di sollievo.
not much is
Questa è la
left.
testimonianza cristiana
This is Christian
e
witness,
tante volte è
and
pure
frequently
eroica.
it's even heroic.
Penso ad esempio a
I think, for
Saint
example, of St. Charles de
Fratelli
Foucauld,
Universali,
the universal brother
ai martiri
of the martyrs of
dell'Algeria,
Algeria,
ma anche a
but
tanti
also
operatori di carità di
of all
oggi.
those charitable workers in our day, volunteers. In this scandalously evangelical style of life, the Church discovers the sure port in which to dock and from which to set out in order to weave bonds with the people of every nation, seeking everywhere the traces of the Spirit and offering all that she herself has received by grace. This is the purest reality of the Church. This is, as Bernanos wrote, quote, the Church of the Saints, adding that, quote, this great apparatus of wisdom, strength, elastic discipline, magnificence, and majesty is nothing by itself, unless inspired by charity, unquote.
Mi piace esaltare questa perspicacia francese.
I'm happy to celebrate this particularly French insight, this creative Christian genius that has reaffirmed so many truths through a multitude of actions and writings. Saint Jasarius of Arles said, quote, if you have charity, you have God, and if you have God, what do you lack? Unquote. Pascal recognized that, quote, the sole object of Scripture is charity, unquote, and that, quote, truth apart from charity is not God, but his image and an idol that one must not love or adore, unquote. And St. John Cassian, who died here, wrote that, quote, everything, even what we consider useful and necessary, is of less value than that good which is peace and charity, unquote. It's right, then, that Christians should be second to none in charity, and that the gospel of charity be the Magna Carta of all pastoral work. We're not called to grieve over times past or to redefine the Church's role in society. We're called to bear witness, not to embroider the gospel with words, but to give it flesh. Not to worry about our visibility, but to spend ourselves in utter gratuity, believing that the measure of Jesus is love without measure. St. Paul, the Apostle of the Nations, who spent much of his life crossing the Mediterranean region from one port to the other, taught that in order to fulfill the law of Christ, it's necessary to bear one another's burdens. Dear brother bishops, let's not burden others. Let's not increase the weight others bear, but let's relieve their hardships in the name of the gospel of mercy, in order to distribute joyfully the consolation of Jesus to a weary and wounded humanity. May the Church let the Church not be a place of prescription, of legislation, but a port of hope for those who have their confidence. Let's enlarge our heart, please. May the Church be a port of refreshment, where people feel encouraged to embark upon life with the incomparable strength born of Christian joy. everyone is involved. Let's remember the Lord said this, let everyone come in. I now come to my last image, that of the lighthouse, which sheds it enables us to see the port. What luminous beacons of light can guide the route of the Mediterranean churches? Thinking of the sea which unites so many different believing communities, I think that one can reflect on more cooperative ways forward, perhaps considering also the expediency of a Mediterranean Bishops' Conference. That could offer greater possibilities for regional dialogue and representation. Also thinking of ports and the theme of migration, it could be profitable to work towards a specific pastoral plan that's even more interconnected, so that those dioceses that are more exposed can provide the best spiritual and human assistance to our brothers and sisters who arrive there in great need. The lighthouse in this prestigious palace that bears its name makes me think especially of young people. They are the light that indicates the way of the future, the route toward the future. Marseille is a great university city, home for 4 campuses, 35,000 students, 5,000 of which are foreigners. Where do we start to weave relationships between cultures, if not in the university? There, young people are not attracted by the seductions of power, but by the dream of building the future. Don't extinguish this dream. May the Mediterranean universities be laboratories of dreams and laboratories of the future, where young people mature by encountering one another, coming to know one another, discovering cultures and contexts both near and diverse. In this way, prejudices are dismantled, wounds are healed, and fundamentalist rhetoric is rejected. Be aware of the many fundamentalisms which today are the fad. Young people, well prepared and used to socializing, will be able to open unexpected doors of dialogue. If we want them to devote themselves to the gospel and the lofty service of politics, we first need to be credible, forgetful of ourselves, free from self-referentiality, dedicated to spending ourselves tirelessly for others. Yet the primary challenge of education has to do with every age, starting with children by mixing with others. They can surmount many barriers, overcome preconceptions, and develop their own identity in a context of mutual enrichment. The Church can certainly contribute to this by offering her educational networks and encouraging a creativity of fraternity. Brothers and sisters, the challenge is also one of a Mediterranean theology. Theology needs to be rooted in life. Theology developed in a laboratory doesn't work. The challenge is also one of a Mediterranean theology, capable of developing ways of thinking rooted in reality, a home to human beings, and not only technical data, poised to unite generations by linking memory and future, promoting with originality the ecumenical journey of Christians and dialogue between believers of different religions. How exciting it would be to set out on this adventurous quest, both philosophical and theological, by drawing from the Mediterranean culture sources that can restore hope to men and women, a mystery of freedom in need of God and others in order to give meaning to their lives. It's necessary likewise to reflect on the mystery of God, whom no one can claim to possess or control, and who must instead be preserved from all violent and instrumental misuse and the awareness that the confession of His grandeur demands of us the humility of seekers. Dear brothers and sisters, I'm happy to be here in Marseille. One time, His Excellency the President invited me to come to France, but at least to come to Marseille. At least I've come to Marseille. I thank you for your patience, your patient listening, and for all your efforts, your dedication. Continue your work. Be a sea of good in order to confront the poverty of today in solidarity and cooperative. Be a welcoming port in order to embrace all those who seek a better future. Be a lighthouse of peace in order to pierce through the culture of encounter, the dark abysses of violence and war. Thank you very much. A beautiful discourse of our Holy Father reflecting on the significance of Marseille and the Mediterranean, reflecting on the sea, the port, and the lighthouse from which the palace, the Palais du Pharo, takes its name. Everyone now on their feet after hearing the discourse of our Holy Father. Once again, we see the President of France, Emmanuel Macron, and the Mayor of Marseille sitting together in the front row. And flanking the Holy Father, religious leaders of various confessions in the church who have been participating in these discussions. Our Holy Father now inviting them to form an ecclesial conference on the Mediterranean so that the church can develop better pastoral responses. We'll now hear from the president of the French Episcopal Conference of Bishops, the Archbishop of Reims, Eric de Moulin-Beaufort. Holy Father, your presence at the conclusion of the third edition of the Mediterranean Encounters strongly attract the attention of everyone. He's thanking the President of France for his presence, the ministers, the mayor, other dignitaries who are here.
Monsieur le Président de la République, Mesdames et Messieurs les ministres, Mesdames et Messieurs les hautes autorités, vous avez en quelque sorte accepté, en étant ici ce matin, d'être les témoins des paroles que le Saint-Père nous a adressées, à nous qui avons participé à ces rencontres méditerranéennes. Et vous pourrez en quelque sorte en être les garants et nous interroger sur la manière dont nous les mettons en œuvre, nous, les évêques qui avons été réunis ici, et puis aussi les jeunes, que le pape a appelés, comme nous l'avons entendu, à être des phares d'une culture de la rencontre. En tout cas, très Saint-Père, votre venue au terme de ces troisième rencontres méditerranéennes
at the conclusion of the Mediterranean encounter strongly attracted the attention of everyone, of the political authorities and citizens of these countries, of believers and non-believers, people of goodwill. For the bishops of the countries,
la parabole que le Seigneur Jésus a développée à partir de là. En tout cas, nous recevons de vous une sorte de priorité de réflexion.
It indicates a priority for reflection and pastoral action.
Et une sorte d'exigence à prendre au
At the end of the 3 days, we receive from you a vivid encouragement to take seriously what our Mediterranean shore calls us to be and to live. I led myself to be guided by Jean Giono, cantor of Provence and the Mediterranean. The sea does not separate, it unites. Looking together at the Mediterranean, contemplating what natural and human geography and history from antiquity to the present have taught us, leads us all to recognize ourselves as heirs, then as engaged in relationships of strength that need to be transformed into relationships of fraternity, and finally invites us to understand our human destiny as a journey toward the homeland of so that people can experience a full life. Everyone, for everyone. We are all heirs to this sea, heirs of a great civilizations that preceded the birth of Christianity and Islam, and in contact with which Judaism was forged, the civilizations that invented the alphabetic writing.
Et nous avons compris ici qu'il y avait une sorte d'histoire de la liberté juive.
This heritage lives again in the way we live our faith or religion.
Une histoire juive de l'espérance aussi, comme il y a une histoire grecque de l'espérance. Et sans doute aussi y a-t-il une histoire arabe ou africaine de la liberté et de l'espérance. Et toutes ces histoires ont besoin sans cesse de se conjoindre en quelque sorte. Ainsi, Jean Giono a-t-il écrit « Tel vallon au nord de Sainte-Victoire semble avoir été décrit par
And he's quoting Sainte-Victoire, such a valley north of Sainte-Victoire seems to have been described by Sinbad the sailor. This worker, hunter, is an Arab in the story of Tabari. This heritage lives again in the way we live our faith and religion. We Catholic bishops, together with the churches to whose service God has called us as pastors, understand it best. To make this millennial heritage bear fruit so that it contributes to the treasure of all humanity. No heir can appropriate such inheritance. Each receives them only to share them. Our countries have also taken advantage of the Mediterranean Sea and the connections it allows between its different shores to establish relations of domination with other people. The poet again, on this water for thousands of years, murder and love were exchanged, and a specifically Mediterranean order was established. Depending on the periods, the dominant countries and dominant shores have varied. The result is a history of beautiful encounters, but also of mutual pain and wounds. We must be able to take a clear-eyed look at this past, give it a clear name, and thus work toward a more real and more profound reconciliation that can touch every person more powerfully than a discourse instrumentalized by political needs or battles. Together with others, no doubt, but with their own spiritual resources, our churches can and must raise strong awareness of the wrongs committed against one another and contribute to reconciliation.
Nos églises devaient être, sont déjà en partie des lieux de lumière et d'apaisement. Il y a de l'orgueil et du mépris.
Finally, we must never forget that the Mediterranean Sea has been and still is a place of personal destinies. It's a source of ascetic excitement, it's a reservoir of food and produce, and it's part of humanity's long history. Contemplating it helps to understand earthly life as a journey to the homeland. To the peoples of its shores, though of different races, of opposite religions, it imposes the same gestures. This is another quote from Giono. Thousands, millions of people have risked their lives in it, for better or for worse, to move toward greater happiness, freedom, life, joy, or to fall into despair or death. We Christians, along with many others, cannot look at its waves without thinking of all those who have relied on it, from Odysseus to those who are trying to leave their country today.
Elle s'offre à qui l'aborde comme une promesse ou comme une menace ou un tombeau. Il nous revient à nous de nous entraider fraternellement pour que chacun ou chacune de ceux qui l'abordent puisse réaliser la promesse de vie et de vie pour toujours qu'il porte et qu'il est lui-même.
Depending on religions or lack of religion, we understand differently the eternity to which people are called. These understandings also determine certain understandings of earthly life and each person's responsibilities. We want to try to open our horizons to one another so that the Mediterranean may be a mosaic of hope. Holy Father, on behalf of all the bishops present, associating myself with the young people working along with us these days, and with all those whom together we represent. Thank you for calling us all together. To leave our respective problems, focus on our common survival, and to look toward the sea and toward the horizons where it leads.
Essayez d'ouvrir nos horizons les uns aux autres pour que l'espérance soit partagée par le plus grand nombre, pour que la Méditerranée devienne la mosaïque de l'espérance que
We want to try to open our horizons to one another so that hope may be shared by all people, by as many people as possible, so that the Mediterranean may be a mosaic of hope where all is a pledge and a promise for all peoples. May we help one another, he who is greater than we who imagine, than we can imagine.
De remercier la conférence épiscopale italienne qui a eu l'initiative.
He's also thanking the Episcopal Conference of Italy.
Bassetti ici présent, mais tous les évêques italiens qui ont bien voulu participer à ces journées.
And especially to Bishop Bassetti, who's been participating in the program in these last days. He is thanking the Cardinal Archbishop of Marseille, Cardinal Aveline, whom we see here.
Les équipes formidables qui ont été mobilisées pour porter, pour penser, pour imaginer et conduire ces moments avec toute une pédagogie très, très intéressante et très stimulante. Leur ténacité, leur exigence, leur créativité, tout cela a contribué à notre joie pendant ces jours. Et puis, très Saint-Père, merci vraiment de nous appeler avec tant de force à sortir de nos problématiques respectives,
And he's thanking our Holy Father here.
Aux uns et aux autres. Merci de nous engager à regarder vers nous quittant nous-mêmes, nous rejoignons le vaste monde, l'humanité entière.
By the sea, leaving behind ourselves, we join the vast world, the whole of humanity, on its way to its final destiny. As we know, the Lord, as we know here in Marseille, joins his friends embarked on the waves. And once again, thanking the Holy Father, the President of the French Episcopal Conference, His Excellency Eric de Moline Beaufort, the Archbishop of Rheims.
Bonjour, je me présente, je suis Diana, libanaise, résidente à Marseille. Et donc, je voudrais offrir aujourd'hui un cadeau au Saint-Père, et à Marseille précisément, qui m'a accueillie durant ces années. Donc, c'est un chant syriaque.
They're thanking Marseille for their welcome. It looks like a woman from Lebanon. They're going to be singing the Hail Mary.
Elle est inspirée des deux rites orientaux, syriaques et byzantins.
It's inspired by a Syriac tradition and Byzantine.
بارخ طوط بنسي ومبارخ في رود كرسخ موران يشوع شيحو سلم لخ مريم ملي الطيبوت مورنا بيخ بارخ طوط بنسي ومبارخ في رود كرسخ موران يشوع شيحو مرت مرم امدانو اتكشفه يتكشفوا حلوفين احنا نحطوين وشو بشاطو نموتان 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 أوه أوه مين
We've just heard the Hail Mary being sung by a young woman. She may be from Lebanon. The cypress of Lebanon on her, cedar of Lebanon on her type of stole that she's wearing. Our Holy Father has now begun to greet the bishops present for this occasion that are here on the stage with him. Again, this is Pope Francis' first public event today. He has taken part in the final session of the Mediterranean meetings at the Palais du Pharo here in Marseille. A meeting which we heard during the Pope's discourse is one in which the Church, along with society, with civil society, has been trying to respond to the phenomenon of migration and other problems created in the Mediterranean area. Now, we now bring to an end this live broadcast of the final session of the Mediterranean meetings here at the Lighthouse Palace, which would be the translation in English. Shortly after this, after meeting with all the bishops, Pope Francis will meet privately with President Emmanuel Macron here inside the palace in the Salon d'Honneur du Maire, or the Mayor's Hall of Honor. And then he'll be taken by car to the Archbishop's residence, where he'll dine in private. Later this afternoon, our ongoing coverage continues. Our Holy Father will be celebrating Mass in Marseille Velodrome Stadium. That will begin around 4:15 p.m. local time. He does return to Rome this evening. He'll arrive in Rome at about 8:50 Central European time. And we'll be back, as I've said, around 4:15 local time for our ongoing coverage of the Pope's apostolic journey here in Marseille as he celebrates Mass with the faithful. I invite you to visit the Vatican News web portal, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and Twitter accounts, where you'll find ongoing coverage of Pope Francis' apostolic journey here, as well as other coverage of other Vatican and world news. On behalf of Vatican Media, I'd like to thank our audio technician, Patrizio Ciprari, and our coordinator, Father Johan Pacheco, and all others who've made this broadcast possible, especially our media partners, Salt and Light Media, EWTN, at Madarshan TV, Shalom World Television Network, Catholic Faith Network, Catholic TV, and Uganda Catholic Television. Laudetur Jesus Christus, praised be Jesus Christ.
Première mi-temps.
Voilà.
Je l'enregistre.